Hi, today I want to show you how you can create a Stripe subscription payment checkout in Wized and Webflow with zero code. We're going to do this all no code today, so let's get started right now. And we're also going to set up a basic webhook as an example in Xano. But I encourage you, you can do this with BuildShip. You can do this with Airtable, maybe not with Airtable, but you can do this with FastGen, with Firebase, with whatever you prefer. Don't limit yourself with Xano just because I'm using Xano, because that's the only thing I understand in terms of backend. So, I encourage you, use what you're the most familiar with. That's why we're going to not talk about Xano today. We're going to say, send the webhook to REST API, and then you can use whichever you want. So let's get started here. So what we want to do is we want to go to our apps and we want to create a new app for Stripe. So we're going to go Stripe and we're going to set this as a REST API because Stripe is a CURL, curl, or shell, and that is a REST API. And we're going to add the Stripe base URL, which as of right now is v1. That may change in the next 20 years. They may move to v3. But as of right now, it is v1. Just feel free to check out their documentation in case you want to make sure that everything is still current and up to date. And then I'm going to create a request. So we're calling this request right now create session. And I'm going to base this on my app for Stripe, and I'm going to use the URL endpoint of /checkout/sessions. That's it. And then I'm going to select the method of post because we're posting data to Stripe. And now we're going to create URL parameters for the success URL. We're going to add the success URL in here. This will be the URL in which the user will be returned or forwarded to after a successful payment. So that may be Wized/success. Okay, perfect. Something like this. You want to do like thank you for your payment or something like this. Cancel URL would be if something goes wrong. You can add that as well, but I don't expect anything to go wrong, so I just have that not added in here yet. And then we're just going to add the line items. We're going to do 0, and that will match to this one as well. It's a bit like an array because we're sending that as parameters. So we cannot send an object. So I'm going to do, we technically could, but that would be too much for this video. So we're going to do line items, 0, price, and we're going to add the price ID in here. Important is this price ID has to be tied to an item that is a recurring payment. If it's not a recurring payment, you cannot work with subscriptions in this example because it wouldn't be a subscription. And then we're going to add the quantity for the line items 0, so targeting this price ID. That is basically like the identifier that we nest those two values together, that they belong together. So then we're going to define the quality and we're going to add the number 1. Don't add something like this. You got to add something like this. It needs to be green. Then it's a number in Wized. And then we're going to add the mode. And before that, we had mode payments if you're going to use a one-time payment, but we're just going to add mode subscription. And that's it. That will tell Stripe, hey, this is a subscription, so get ready for it. And then we're just going to add a client reference ID, and you want to do this dynamically, probably as your user ID or your row ID. If you use Airtable, for example, this has to be a dynamic, unique ID that identifies the user that is starting the payment, so that when you successfully receive that payment and Stripe will send you a webhook, a request. If you know Zapier, you know what I'm talking about. When Stripe will send you a webhook, we know for which person it's supposed to be, for which user, and then we can autonomously activate their account if we want to, or send them a download, or give them access to our Discord server, or invite them to our Facebook group. The possibilities are endless. So then, the last thing is authorization. We're going to go to the header and we're going to add authorization, and we're going to add bearer, and we're going to do a plus, and we're going to add our secret token in here that just contains our Stripe API key to not expose our Stripe API key on our front end, because Wized also offers you a server-side component that will then help you to securely do those API calls, a bit like Zapier, where you can then, but not really Zapier, but Wized will help you to execute these requests in a secure environment and to keep your data safe. You don't have that functionality if you're just going to jam custom code in a Webflow page. Then you don't have that server-side component, and you would expose your API keys to other people that may be doing fraudulent stuff with those. So that's why you want to have all requests going on in Wized for your web app to make sure that everything is secure and protected. And now let's go to the live site and see if it works what we just did. So if I'm going to click on checkout, I will be redirected to Stripe, and we will see it's $29 per month, and I can now go ahead and pay. So that works. If you only need to set this up and you don't care about tracking who paid, you can pause this video here. Now I'm going to fill out this form, and we're going to do some webhook magic to then autonomously create or recognize who paid. So we're going to send a notification to our server, aka Xano, aka Airtable, aka Firebase, whatever you want to use, everything, or even technically MemberStack if you want to go around paying 5% transaction fees with them. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here on camera, but so the possibilities are endless. That's just what I wanted to say here. But I'm just going to fill that out, and then I'm going to cut back to that other part. So I filled everything out here, and you didn't see that Safari or Arc actually suggested my personal credit card number in here. So let's just go now to Stripe, and let's create a webhook for this. So the information is in here. We want to go to developers. We want to go to webhooks. That's right here. And then we want to go to add an endpoint. So we're now going to get to this page, and don't get scared by this part. You're not going to touch that. That's just Stripe trying to confuse you. So let's just change it to this one that looks less codey. You see, you already have your Zapier webhook right here. Look at that. So you feel familiar with that environment. So let's go to our endpoint. And you can even do this in Xano. Not Xano. You can do it in Xano, yes, but you could create this endpoint in Zapier. You could create a webhook event listener in Zapier. You could create one in Make. You could create one in Xano if you don't want to pay for that, because Xano doesn't charge you by actions. They just give you that instance and let you jam it full as much as you want. You can do that in FastGen. You can do this in Firebase, as far as I'm aware of. You can do this in BuildChip. In this example, because I don't like to pay for Zapier, I'm going to build this for free in Xano. And yeah, I'm going to do that here. I'm just going to pay $99 a month, but I have everything in Xano, and I'm going to use it because I can build free instances like I would do in Zapier. I can do free webhooks and all of that in Xano, and they give me unlimited capacity because I have my own little virtual machine with them. So that's a pretty neat thing. So I create this, and I'm going to go to copy endpoint URL. It's the same with Zapier. You would just create a new Zap and have like a webhook event listener, or with Make, you would create a webhook event listener, and with FastGen, you would do something else, however they call that. But I'm going to put that endpoint URL right in here from my webhook, and I'm going to call this successful checkout. And I'm going to add the event for checkout. Oh, checkout completed. This one. I'm going to add that event, and I'm going to click on add endpoint. Now, every time I'm going to successfully, and let's add a random phone number. Does that work with a random phone number? Let's see. Let's see. I need to add 2 more. 1 more, let's see. It just doesn't let me do that with a fake phone number. So no phone number in here. And I'm going to submit this. Perfect. And now, after this will be loaded, we're going to get that webhook sent. So we're going to get a confirmation, and I got to close Wized immediately because their spline animation is draining my capacity of this MacBook Air. So we see that we successfully created the session, and we see that we passed on the client reference ID. So we know that Wized successfully created the session, and we can even get more information in here. If we scroll down, we get the email. Feel free to email me. And we're going to see it was a subscription, and we're going to see subscription payment status paid. That will be very important. We'll be coming back to that right in a few minutes. Now, if I go to Xano, I will see that I will have my request history, and you will see that I received that information in here. And yeah, I got that information. So what we want to do is we want to add a JSON input, and we want to do __ self. And actually, let me just make sure and Stack Overflow that that is actually the right way to do it. In HTTPS, that seems to be right. If not, we will know who did it wrong. And basically what we want to do is we want to create a variable now, and we want to target, and we want to call this Stripe _data, different based on which basically on which endpoint service you're using. In Zapier will be a bit different. In FastGen it will be a bit different, but we're going to do it like this. We're going to create a variable, and now we want to actually define a subpath. So we're going back to our request history, and I just don't want all that junk in here. I just only want that data and then the data object in here, because that other thing doesn't really interest me. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to my variable, and actually I need to first define this as a variable. So we have the Stripe data, and then because I cannot do this on an input, I need to create a new variable. Let's call this final data, and we're going to take that Stripe data and we're going to define the subpath, and I only want this to work with the data. Perfect. So we have Stripe data.data. It's perfect. And now I will be returning the final data. Now I'm going to publish that, and let's see if that works. Let's go back, and the nice thing about Stripe is you can resend this request, and we just successfully resent this. And let's go to our request history, and yeah, we just actually that's not it. Let's wait until we receive this, and we may not receive this. Let's look into that. Okay, now we just got it. Perfect. So if I go on input, I see I got this data, and let's look into output. We see that I returned this object. Perfect. It worked. Wonderful. So I'm going to get that data. Now, you may ask yourself, what are we doing with that data? We just got data after a successful payment. Now, what you can do is you have the checkout ID, but more importantly, you have your customer ID in Stripe. And if we go to, scroll a bit more down, to the client reference ID, we're going to get the client reference ID. And the most important thing if you're going to run a SaaS or a subscription business is you want to collect this information now on checkout successful, right? And you want to probably base any actions you're going to do on a successful payment status, which you will find somewhere in here. It will say somewhere paid, but we can look into that later. But the important thing, just so that you know, is when a user on your platform interacts with Stripe, Stripe will automatically create a user ID. And we want to make sure that whenever Stripe, or in this is basically the first contact to our client or to our user, we want to make sure to link our internal client reference ID with Stripe's customer ID. So what we would like to do is we would now add an action or a zap or a scenario or whatever. In Xano, we would just do an edit record or an add record. We would go and look in our existing customer database table for client underscore reference ID. And we would basically then get that record and edit that record for the client reference ID to then include the field and add the field for the row customer to add the Stripe customer ID, so that we link which of our users identified by our internal ID, which we pass on in the client reference ID into the Stripe object, that this person, that we actually recognize that person in Stripe. So when this person creates the checkout, and we're going to get our internal ID for them in here, this would be probably your UUID or your table row ID. We want to make sure to then take this, we add a function in Xano or wherever that we're going to query our database in an edit record, and we're going to add the record that has that whatever row matches this, and we're going to edit the record for probably you want to add a field Stripe customer ID. And then you're going to take this customer ID, which we're going to get in this object, and then you're going to add that in there. So that later on, when you have a subscription canceled and you get a customer 0859 Stripe ID canceled, you can look into your database and query who of my own users, which I have my own indexing system for, has this Stripe customer ID. And you know, oh, it's Mike. I knew it from the beginning when I saw that cancellation. And then you're just going to kick Mike off your platform, or you're going to uncheck that box for has access, or in this example here, if you would go back to the object, you would check the box for has access. But doing this step initially to connect our internal identification system, which UUIDs or whatever you use, and the way that Stripe created this customer account for this person, you want to link that so that later on when the customer wants to add, for example, a one-time purchase, you can just simply go to Stripe instead of passing on a client ID, and you can do like a query. If this user already has a Stripe ID added to its table, I don't want to pass on the client reference ID. I want to pass on an object for customer ID to then create the new payment or the new purchase on their Stripe customer profile, so that I don't have 50 Stripe customer profiles for the same user. And this is a nice way to identify that. And I'm just going to leave it open how you're going to do this, because you may be using Zapier for that. It may be very helpful to make this in Make or Zapier if you already have your whole scenarios going on in here. For example, to send out put that on Slack, or if you do high ticket sales, you just add them to the Slack group or something like this, or you have your sales team reach out to onboard them. Payments really get complicated. It's very customized. But this is what you want to look out for. You want to assign the client reference ID to the customer ID and then add the customer ID to your table. And that you want to make sure that then after that you have a field in the customer ID that you're going to use the customer ID to create any further checkout session for that user once he or she has that customer ID, so that everything gets linked back to that user, which will then also make it easier for you if you're going to incorporate things like Stripe subscription checkout to avoid all that liabilities you have to have with handling cancellations, upgrades, and all of that. And then, for example, if a user upgrades, you're just going to look, oh, customer ID, this and this upgraded. Which of my user has that customer ID in my data table? Oh, again, it's Mike. Perfect. He just canceled to upgrade to the enterprise plan. Congratulations, or something like this. So this is really the whole setup, everything you need to know. And This whole principle applies to all other things Stripe has to offer for payment canceled, subscription canceled, something like this, but something to watch out for. When you cancel a payment or cancel a subscription, Stripe will only send you their customer ID of the customer who canceled. They're not going to pass you on the metadata or the client reference ID you have assigned to this subscription. So you want to make sure that the moment a payment gets created, because you get for the checkout session created your client reference ID back, you want to take this client reference ID, look which user it is in your table, and then assign them immediately with the Stripe ID that Stripe created for them. So that then when they cancel their payment, which will not give you a Stripe, which will not give you a client reference ID, which will only give you a Stripe customer ID, that then you can go into your table and say, oh, customer ID 857 canceled, and I'm going to kick them off my platform. To help you further identify those happenstances when Stripe starts moving away from the identification you gave them for the initial contact with Stripe, but then to continue identifying those because you already have that information in your database populated. And this is everything and all the secrets you really need to know about Stripe subscriptions. And if you have any questions about this, please feel free to put them down in the comments, and I will be more than happy to answer all your questions and to do any further videos about this or any other topics. So thank you so much for watching this. Thank you so much for all your support. I really appreciate that, and see you as always tomorrow. Bye-bye.